When you have a major national crisis caused by the shortage of a key product, you take steps to facilitate an increase in the provision of the thing that's in short supply, right? And that would logically involve providing incentives to the people who supply the commodity that's scarce, or otherwise creating conditions that make it easier for them to create more of that commodity. You would, wouldn't you? Well, you would think so in a sensible world, but that's not what happens in Australia. Certainly not in the housing market, where the opposite usually happens. Federal, state and local governments keep making decisions that make the rental shortage worse and the general undersupply of new dwellings worse. In the housing market, there are two things which have a serious undersupply. There's a shortage in new homes being built, and there's a big shortage of properties available for rent. Now, many people think it's the same thing, that you fix the rental shortage by building more homes, but that is not the solution. There are two separate, although related issues, and both problems are getting more and more serious because politicians keep making them worse. We need to build a certain number of new dwellings each year in Australia to keep up with population growth, fueled in part by overseas migration, and also the formation of new households. In recent years, Australia has fallen well short of the numbers of new dwellings needed for a host of reasons. Now, the federal government has an ambitious target of 1.2 million new homes in 5 years, but there is no chance of this being achieved. One of the key reasons that we won't build enough new homes is because state and local politicians in particular keep making it harder and more costly to create new dwellings. We already have a situation where up to half the cost of creating a new house and land package is government taxes, fees and charges. Studies have shown that the taxation component of a new house ranges from 35% in cities like Brisbane and Melbourne up to 50% in Sydney. And politicians keep tinkering with the design of new dwellings, in theory to make them safer or more accessible or more environmentally friendly, but every time they change the rules affecting the construction of new homes, they make them more expensive. And that's the affordability problem in a nutshell. All levels of government using the housing industry as a cash cow and milk it for revenue through a range of taxes, fees and charges, and they keep making dwellings more expensive with supposedly well-intentioned new rules. They also contribute to the shortage of new homes and the high cost of new homes by taking people resources out of the home building industry to build headline-grabbing new infrastructure projects. Many big real estate projects, such as high-rise apartment developments across Australia, have been scrapped because the developers can't get the tradespeople they need or the materials they need, and because the costs are so high that building those projects is not financially viable anymore. And the ACT, the Territory Government, has introduced new rules for the personal liability of directors of dwelling providing entities, and that includes not-for-profit organisations like community housing providers. And these rules are so severe that it's likely to cause an exodus of builders and community organisations from the ACT, thereby worsening the housing shortage there. Here's one of the consequences of those poorly drafted laws. If you join the board of a community housing provider today and they have a house that was built 5 years ago and has defects, you can be held personally liable for the costs even though you weren't on the board when it was built. Now, this has come about in Canberra because the Greens, the most destructive force in Australian politics, have a share of power in the ACT government, and they regard anyone involved in the housing industry as the enemy. And make no mistake, if you own a business or if you're the owner of investment real estate, the Greens do regard you as something close to a criminal who needs to be squashed. They are obsessed with the notion that property investors are all rich bastards who own 10 or 20 properties and are monstering their tenants and ripping off the tax system. And that's patently and blatantly false, but the Greens are not interested in hearing any alternative viewpoints. They are the petulant brats of Australian politics. I am pleased to observe that despite all of their posturing and grandstanding, the Greens last weekend failed to have any impact on the election for the Brisbane City Council, which is the biggest LGA in the nation, or on the two state government by-elections held in Queensland at the same time. Now, there's no doubt that the serious and unprecedented shortage of rental properties across Australia has been caused by political decisions that has made investment ownership less and less attractive. Vacancy rates have been falling steadily for the past 5 years to the current unprecedented low levels, and you can chart the decline in the number of available rental properties with a series of state government decisions which have made ownership onerous and caused more and more investor owners to sell up and get out. Now, Australia's best real estate analyst, Simon Presley of Propertyology, confirms that there have been around 20 major state government legislations in the recent years, all of them detrimental to the owners of investment properties. He also points out that the Australian population has increased by 3 million people in the past 8 years. But in that time, the number of homes available for rental has decreased 58%, and the number of homes listed for sale has decreased 36%. Now, those are incredible numbers which explain, in simple terms, the seriousness of the shortage crisis. And the politicians, mostly state governments, which have caused this dire situation, are still doing it. They continue to make decisions and pass laws which make it worse. They keep slamming the people who are the source of the product that's in short supply. Investors who own Victoria are selling up and getting out in large numbers because Victoria is by far the most unfriendly state in Australia for property investors. The government there has increased existing taxes for owners, and they've introduced new taxes on the people who supply the product that's in short supply. There are big increases in land tax, a new absentee owner surcharge, a new short stay accommodation levy, and a new vacant residential land tax on empty homes. There's also a new construction code which increases the costs of new dwellings, and there are restrictions on rental increases. Now, James Kirby, the wealth columnist for the Australian newspaper, commented on the 15th of March that the taxation nightmare imposed by the state government in Victoria was the reason why Melbourne is the worst performing residential property market in the nation. As a result of these measures, in just 1 month, the vacancy rate in Melbourne dropped from 1.5% to 1.0%, which is a huge change in such a short time frame. And believe me, it will get worse. But it's not just Victoria. Every state and territory has made changes that shift the power balance to tenants and or increase the cost of owners, causing more and more investors to sell. South Australia has recently launched changes to its tenancy laws, and the political statement says new rental laws have been passed by the Parliament of South Australia to improve protections for tenants while balancing the rights of landlords. That's the political rhetoric, but here's the reality. There are 17 major changes, and all of them shift the balance to tenants. For example, there are reduced rental bonds, there's a ban on rental bidding, there are restrictions on what you can ask tenants when they're applying to rent your property, there are limits on rental increases, there are new rights for tenants to sublet your premises, there are new penalties on landlords for various breaches but none for tenants, there are restrictions on ending tenancies, there are more rights to tenants in disputes, the notice period to end tenancy is increased from 28 days to 60 days, there's a limit on inspections by your property manager, you can't refuse them pets if they want to have them, and there are new rights to tenants to make modifications to your building. And the measures which balance the rights of property owners, well, there aren't any. And that, in simple terms, is why we have a chronic rental shortage which has no end in sight. It keeps getting worse because state governments keep making it so.